Un'agenda è fatta di anni, mesi, giorni, e ogni giorno una nuova generazione di idee si fa spazio, in modo sostenibile, inclusivo, intelligente. Ehi gente, non sarà facile, ma proviamoci. Siamo qui per le stesse ragioni. Continuiamo a collaborare, immaginare, creare. Cerchiamo nuova energia, pulita, rinnovabile. Rinnoviamo il modo di interagire, io e te, lui, lei, loro, tutti. Facciamoci sentire, insieme ce la facciamo. Partecipa al Festival dello Sviluppo Sostenibile 2022. Mettilo in agenda, stiamo agendo. Contribuisci al raggiungimento degli obiettivi dell'Agenda ONU 2030.
Good morning. Welcome to all of you and thank you for your participation. We are opening the festival. Today we're going to have a very important meeting. We are going to prepare our agenda for the just transition. There'll be several events, meetings. We are kind of reaching our objective, which is aimed at improving participation of citizens in our society, which is fundamental, especially now where we are having really non-neglectable difficulties. I'd like to justify the co-chairman of the Alliance for and cannot be with us today. I thank Marina Sereni, Deputy Minister of International Cooperation, and she's been following and helping us in our work as Alliance. I thank her for her cooperation and support that she's been giving us in these past few years. I'd like to invite her to come here on stage for a welcoming address from her and for us, which is a very important occasion. Thank you, President. Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for your invitation. I'm really glad to be here with you to participate in this event on ecological transition, practically on the eve of my mandate expiry. So I couldn't avoid and be here, although the times are really difficult and dense. I'd like to start from a quote to be addressed to our audience here and people who are remotely connected. The Republic safeguards environment, biodiversity and ecosystems in the interest of future generations through the law of the state, disciplines, modes and ways in which animals are to be safeguarded. It's the new Article 9 of our Constitution. It never happened before that Constitution was modified in its fundamental principles, and for the very first time it's been modified in order to include the value, the relevance of the environment among founding principles of our Constitution. This very reform law, constitutional reform law, as you all know, was approved not long ago by a wide majority of the Parliament. Also intervened on Article 41 of the Constitution by including the respect of the environment as a limit to the economic initiative freedom. Now, this innovation has got a huge value. It's enormously important, not only because environment is put amongst the highest principles, but also because it shapes development of value to the extent that it is sustainable. And I believe that the very first merit of the reform goes to the Alliance for Sustainable Development. This alliance has been amongst the promoters and more effective driving agents of this reform. As we know, our Constitution is based on a program. Now it's up to the political forces to put it into effect with the right governmental decisions, and it's up to the society, the whole of the society, to implement it through social activities, civil commitment, economic activities. So the very raison d'etre of Asvis. However, we all very well know that the environment and sustainable development aren't only national challenges, they are global ones. The action of an individual state is not enough. It risks and be nullified if not globally coordinated. The reference framework of this situation, and so by necessity, the 2030 agenda that was kind of perfectly reminded us by the initial video, and by the SDGs, which come out from this 2030 agenda. So 193 UN nations really committed in this endeavor, as we know here. And unfortunately, we have been creating backlogs and delays in implementation of SDGs. International crises are one of the main reasons for this delay. There are multidimensional crises. We are trying and counteract. Others are structural crises. Very few are there and deny their urgency, like climate change. Other crises are really more recent ones, and they turned into endemic crises. I'm, of course, referring to COVID-19 pandemic, and there are other crises we are kind of facing today, and we find it hard to rationally think about them. They are having an ever-growing negative impact on us, and I'm referring to the Russian aggression in Ukraine, which is producing severe aftermath and consequences in our everyday life and on all the international community. To this crisis, we could add other ones, but I believe other people will intervene. I'm thinking of the various conflicts and humanitarian crises, which are the result of these crises and conflicts, kind of put us off track. A very few years have to elapse before 2030. Not all of the SDGs were improved, but as for some of them, we have to record a regression. And why? Because these SDGs are essential. We cannot avoid and keep them in mind in our own efforts. And our efforts have to be multilateral ones, because no state, whatever its dimension and power, can alone, win these global challenges we're confronted with. Environmental sustainability, ecological transition has to remain at the center of the international agenda. Above all, looking at the most important international events and meetings, I'm thinking of COP27 in Egypt, Conference on Climate, and COP15 on biodiversity to be held in Canada. So this very perspective of multilateral common work cannot be neglected and cannot be forgotten by those who have government and political responsibilities. However, implementation of 2030 agenda, as our SDGs number 17 tells us, needs partnerships, needs a synergy of actions among different stakeholders, the state, international organizations, civil society, and the commitment of every single citizen is basic, is critical. Like waste disposal, it's important not to waste food, it's fundamental to save water and energy. I mean, these are all very little, small actions which concern companies, families, the citizens, local communities, that can certainly make the difference. For this, I believe it is very important to carry on with the awareness campaigns, promoting participation with citizenship. We certainly can promote and encourage this. The Alliance for Sustainable Development is in the forefront. It's the main actor. In this sense, they made an excellent work in the past few years, really full commitment, not just to reach the individual citizens, but a whole set of actors who have responsibilities in this field in order to promote good practices, very small actions which make the difference. And as far as this is concerned, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs tried to give its contribution, that of awareness raising through several initiatives. I'm thinking of a campaign for the SDGs, which with some partners, international ones, like UN SDGs campaign, the European Commission, Save the Children, FAO, the Mediterranean Agronomic Institute of Bari. Well, with them, we were able to tour Italy, tour the main Italian cities to create interactive installations aimed at the children, the younger generations in order to tell the importance of a 2030 agenda. And I'm also thinking of the work done by some diplomatic seats and some cultural institutions really connecting with your own festival at the same time in order to organize events aimed at enhancing activities and projects of the Italian main actors in the field of sustainable development. I'm thinking of the activities of Italian cooperation as a ministry, and in order to frame our cooperation on an international level within the SDGs. And I'm also thinking about our annual report, Italy and Sustainable Development Objectives by Asvis. So it's very important, I think, to underline this level of cooperation as a legacy that we remit to the next legislature, which is about to start. So it's just as fundamental to insist on the spirit of responsibility, accountability of every single citizen up to political decision makers in order to achieve the SDGs. And our report we submitted to the UN. We wrote, Italy supports the guiding principles of 2030 as agenda in order to promote equitable, inclusive societies free from fear and violence, restating that no development, no sustainable development can exist without peace, and no sustainable development can exist without peace. So justice in ecological transition is a fundamental theme if we look at the perspective of peace, and if we look at emerging countries and the poorest ones whose income is very low, which means Italy should consistently follow two channels looking at the 2030 agenda. We have to be able to develop this inside with policies completing ecological transition by investing on renewables, continuing in progressively reduce fossil fuels use, and this is just as urgent, not less urgent, in the light of the war created by the Russian Federation, which has had such a strong impact on the energy market. At the same time, we should look at the global international dimension, which specifically involves and concerns the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Well, it's quite near. We have considered the crisis, which have slowed down the SDGs, the 17 SDGs that have to continue and be the real objective. And tomorrow we will see the settling of the new parliament. Asvis will continue and perform its function of a stimulus proposal towards all. This is a fundamental action to achieve, to reach objectives which concerns us all and the future of our planet. Thank you, and I wish you good work. Thank you, Marina. Let's continue with our works, and I'm asking now the control room to give us the connection with Professor Jeffrey Tsai. And I start, and when the professor will be with us, it's not the very first time he is with us, and I thank him very much for the attention given and paid to the work of our alliance. I believe this is a way to, says the speaker, to operate this device. As the first slide, can you see that? Can you read? Very well, thank you very much. Today's event, as we were saying, is particularly important for our alliance because we introduced our work, which will be available, of course, within the website. You'll be able to download it and read it at ease, study and deepen our quaderno, what we've prepared in the past few months. I must say, I'm really proud and I'm really satisfied that That was a very important commitment which lasted a few months. And I would like to say that this was a joint effort because we had our friends from the Alliance involved, those who work on a day-by-day level to support the proposal by Asvis. Well, this document, if you'll be willing to read it, it's kind of unique in this international landscape because of its messages and content and the whole vision which is available now to the country. We wish that this invitation from us, this attitude of ours to prepare and draft proposals may be included in the institutions, in the everyday activities, in order to widely involve society at all levels. The very first fundamental element which, reconfirm its value is really necessary today. We say that sustainable development is a process requiring a transition, a transformation, I would say, which brings us from the current development model, which is not sustainable. We really verified this in the past 30 years, should bring us to a new dimension, a new way of promoting, developing human activities, being able to keep at the very center the people, communities, and build what is good for the whole of mankind by safeguarding nature. Another key element, we have to find a new balance which is decisive in order to distribute and share well-being on a global scale. In order to achieve all this, we have to move, as Marina underlined before, like the very important constitutional reform approved in February this year, as she underlined. Asvis was there to provide a very important support, starting from Enrico Giovannini, the very first creator, pioneer. It took him 6 years, but that was an extraordinary outcome. And there's a notion, as the minister underlined, so to really be concerned and be committed and act in the interest of future generations. That's another key point of the overall vision of contents and values which 2030 agenda made available to us. People are beneficiaries, just as, and I'd like to underline this, well, in saying people are beneficiaries means that we have to re-guide, reorient the way we live, the way we act, the way we create relations and build actions and projects. Same main aim. So this is not the case today. We need, as Pope Franciscus says, we need an ecological conversion. So find the right way in order to promote this approach. And the economy is a fundamental engine in order to contribute to this whole process. That's another aspect I'd like to underline. If we want unchanged perspective, and this is a must for us, we can only achieve this if economy at large integrates. That's the fundamental challenge. So economy should include, should allow processes, products and services, and in general economic activities include in their DNA the very contents of 2030 agenda and sustainable development. I see Professor Jeffrey Saffer online. Good morning, dear Professor. Thank you for your participation to this international event. I'd like to give him the floor without further ado. So, that I stop now my presentation, and I would like to invite you to bring to us your considerations. As I said, you had other occasions to be here with us. Of course, here in the prisons, physically present a couple of years ago, or in other occasions and other meetings. Thanking you very much for being here. And we thank you above all for what you do to promote the contents of sustainable development. You have the floor now. Thank you.
lower inequalities, universal access to public services like healthcare and education. So, oops, can you hear me? Hello? Okay, I'm sorry. Socially, it is to end discrimination, gender inequality, to ensure universal access to healthcare, education, social protection, and other services. And environmentally, it needs to confront the three main environmental challenges: the human-induced climate change, the human-induced destruction of biodiversity and ecosystems, and the human-caused pollution that is rampant in the air, the waters, the soils, the oceans. So these are the three big challenges. Now, this is a very bold and broad agenda, and it requires a bold and new kind of governance. It requires our governments to be able to make long-term plans, to be able to invest strongly in those plans, and to be able to implement the plans. And the only reason to doing this right now is the European Union, because it is probably the closest thing we have on the planet to a sustainable development strategy, because it is a plan to mid-century. It is holistic, that addresses climate, energy, waste, food, global supply chain access, and it is funded with special funds from the European Union central budget. We know in Italy how much difference that made in terms of being able to implement a recovery from the pandemic. But think of how few regions in the world have anything like the European Green Deal right now. Poor countries could never do this on their own. They don't have the financial means to carry out such a program. They don't have the expertise to carry out such a program. They don't have the regional cooperation to carry out such a program. So Europe, which is very concerned about climate change, is in the lead, but Europe, of course, is a very small contributor to the overall greenhouse gas emissions now. And the big players, the United States and China and others, don't have this, and other regions of the world, Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, South Asia, could not do this without a lot more global collaboration and a lot more global financing. All of that is feasible. None of it is beyond our reach. None of it is beyond technical or financial feasibility. And yet none of it is being done. And the problem, most of all, is a lack of cooperation among the main regions of the world to implement a bolder strategy, including more financial support for developing countries. Quite the contrary, we have a collapse of global cooperation in the last 5 years. The tensions between the US and China are at the highest level in decades. And of course, we have an open war in Ukraine, and there is no diplomacy at all right now between Europe and Russia, which is reckless, very dangerous, that Europe says we have no one to talk to, so we engage in no relationship. This is a reckless position of Europe but it is the position of the United States, and Europe is going along with this NATO no negotiation policy. So I am sad to say that though this agenda is the right agenda for the world, though 2022 has exposed again how urgently we face environmental crises, though we are in an absolutely disastrous situation with regard to climate change and ecological degradation, we're not succeeding on this agenda. I'll just end by saying that I believe that Europe could play a far more constructive role than it does right now, and should play a far more constructive role than it does right now. First of all, Europe should return to diplomacy, not just to NATO. This is a big mistake. Europe is different from NATO, but it's become almost the same thing in recent years, and that is a shame, because Europe is better than NATO. NATO is the United States run the world. But Europe has values, really are universal values, and should be. And so I hope that Europe returns to diplomacy, including with Russia, so that this war can be ended. Because as long as it can actually to achieve sustainable development, increasing militarization in the Indo-Pacific will not deliver stability. It will lead to the same kind of war that we have in Ukraine, but this time in Taiwan or some other location in East Asia. So that's my main message, which is that the agenda is the right one. It's urgent, it's feasible, but it requires cooperation within regions such as the European Green Deal, but also at the global scale among the major powers. And until we return to a framework of diplomacy, we are not going to have a framework of sustainable development. So thank you for the chance to share those brief remarks with you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we had a very bad connection with Professor Sachs, but the message is clear. And I think it is quite important. We should share his message, find a way to achieve the agenda. I would go on with some key elements that are in line with Marina Sereni's and Professor Sachs' words. In Italy, and the same goes for any other country, we have to fight against climate change and protect biodiversity as a national guideline. Let me stress this point. Despite the current efforts, we do need to increase the level of consistency, taking up responsibility for such strategic lines and make them consistent with national policies. At the same time, we have to adapt specific conditions, unique regional conditions, finding the right way so that benefits can be obtained in Italy. And we should also find benefits resulting from proper biodiversity. In particular, may I stress, speaking of climate change, that it is very urgent and very compelling. I don't want to mention the Marche catastrophe of last summer with a loss of human lives and huge problems in the region. So even at national level, we have to prepare stress tests to measure the level of vulnerability of an area and consequently prepare plans. This specific effort should be done in each individual area within a national framework, and the national plan about adaptation to climate change has not been prepared yet. Also, we need to enhance geographic specificities to intensify investment in renewables. Again, this is quite important. And energy requirement for the winter is another issue to address, and this can help us accelerate this process. Yesterday, a major event took place in this room, organized by Goal 1 and 10 together with the Forum on Diversity and Inequalities. It is very important to get civil society involved. Let me stress the major role of energy communities in this respect. They can concretely contribute to the transition and reconversion process while respecting local specificities, but those communities can certainly help this achievement. According to European estimates, between now and 2050, at least 50% of renewables will be produced locally. So it is very, very important to act along these lines. Also, look at this summary slide. In a nutshell, it highlights the ecological footprint of mankind. We are in debt to the earth. It's not about financial debt only, it's also a debt vis-a-vis biodiversity, to biodiversity. That's why it is so compelling to respond adequately to reduce this awful indebtedness, and circular economy can be a way out. Recycling, reuse, saving. By the way, Italy is one of the leading European countries in terms of circular economy, and it can perform even better. Globally speaking, the day we depleted natural resources was the 28th of July. You know what it means? We are creating a huge gap, and this has been going on since the 70s. In Italy, the same date falls on the 15th of May. This is why we have to act now. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but there is room to put together projects, designs, plans to react to all this. As for contamination, pollution, in the Pianura Padana and also in Central Europe, thousands of people die of air pollution every year. So we have a problem with health. That's why we should immediately enforce national plans to control air pollution. And we should also prevent the progressive depletion and impoverishment of water. Such an intervention, such an initiative, of course, has many ramifications. This is another busy and important slide. It shows how Europe in the last 3 years has deployed several interventions. Let me make some examples. Italy needs to adopt a plan for nature restoration. 30% of the country should be covered by such plan. We have to develop a strategy for woods, forests, invest in green urban areas, and also protect the health of the soil, and we are lagging behind. That's why we need to accelerate this process, effectively extending ecosystems over 30% of the land, so it's an absolute must. Again, Italy should reach at least 30% of organic agricultural areas between now and 2030. Marina Sereni underlined a just vision of ecological transition. This notebook, as it were, includes different dimensions of the 2030 agenda from a social, economic, and environmental and institutional viewpoint. On the social side, since this is a transformative process, we have to act upon inequalities, reduce poverty, counter poverty, because they are an integral part of the ecological transition process. How? Through welfare reform. The current welfare system cannot effectively fulfill such goals. Italy suffers from a number of vulnerabilities, not only the pandemic, but also others. Also, according to European institutions, we have to prepare a social plan for climate, using the European Fund for Climate, the Social Fund on Climate. So here too, we need to develop a plan. Of course, the war is also causing climate problems. Energy poverty is on the rise. This is another element that should be placed at the center of our efforts. Moreover, we have to renovate, redevelop the existing buildings. More events will be held during the festival to focus on these areas. As to education and health, we need to increase and prioritize a plan to integrate education to ecological transition and sustainable development in schools. Some attempts were made in the last 2 or 3 years. Asvis signed a memorandum with the ministry. Some educational activities are ongoing, but we need to act system-wide to fulfill this goal, and likewise we need to increase the level of support, intervention and action on citizenship education, another major topic. According to WHO, climate change is the greatest challenge for human health, and so we have to adopt an integrated approach where health is protected and improved thanks to prevention. Young people and gender equality. Youth and gender equality. Last week an event was held on Goal 5, organized by the working group of our alliance. The festival will close with an event for young people. So here too, we try to be consistent because we want to promote and strengthen this dimension. How? Through not being paternalistic. We don't want to tell people what they have to do. We try to promote a creative potential release process so that young people build their future and turn themselves into a stimulus to change. This is particularly addressed to us, to the system, to the rest of the country. We would like to introduce a green job guarantee as a welfare measure so that more and more people join us in this effort. This is a transformation we want to promote. Equally essential is the strategic role of women, the female gender. Women are generally more sensitive towards the towards environmental themes. Economy. Economy is an engine for transformation, but you have to change viewpoint. Yes, many companies in Italy are committing to sustainable development, but we have to be more adequate, more appropriate in a world. I don't want to be lengthy. We should extend and promote this process of adjustment and tutoring, transformation, using every possible drivers available, institutions, finance. They should all be part of this effort to contribute to this fundamental process. So GDP should be related to ecological transition. The way plans are designed and proposed should take this into account. By the way, ecological transition is economical, it's cost effective. For every euro invested to restore nature, 8 to 38 euros are returned. This is a very reliable estimate. Companies investing in sustainability perform much better, according to the Bank of Italy, ISTAT, Cerved, because these companies are more dynamic, better able to introduce innovation, so they perform financially better by sticking to the 2030 agenda, dignified work and raw materials. We need a national strategy on employment. We need to systematically increase investment in this through an integration with a plan on skills. Again, Europe helps women and young people and vulnerable groups, multiplying ×6 the current quality training offering for grown-ups in line with the EU goals. The Lisbon indications from 18 months ago tell us that European countries need to have 60% of grown-ups receiving education and training every year, whereas this proportion is only 10% in Italy, so there is a huge gap to fill as soon as possible. And speaking of raw materials and dignified, decent jobs, again, we have to go back to the European dimension. Europe has begun a major analysis to help the Commission called Industry 5.0. Italy is in a vantage position, by the way. I talked about the circular economy. We should find a way to incorporate the industrial strategy. I already talked about finance. We need a reform of ecological tax, of the ecological tax system. We should turn, we have to be proactive and positive in terms of subsidies to reward ecologically sustainable activities, and again, public finance should help companies adopting such environmentally friendly initiatives. Finally, the reform of the Constitution is a major milestone, but we have to guarantee the respect for the rule of law as a key requirement to gain trust of citizens by citizens. The term trust was evoked yesterday during the meeting on democratic participation. This is one of the most important investments to create the conditions where institutions look credible in their exchanges with citizens. In this way only it is possible to act along the same lines. We have to invest in vision, design, and management of the public administration, contributing to a basic cultural transformation concerning constitutional principles, the dissemination of skills. So opening up to a new dimension, we shouldn't see this as an obligation, as a constraint. It's an opportunity to open up to something new, to progressively increase the skills of those working for the public administration. Multi-level strategies, collaboration with institutions, reducing and overcoming administrative fragmentation. These elements too can increase effectiveness to enable a coordinated strategic plan that covers digitization, human resources, data interoperability, models to assess ex ante and also ex post, because we want to understand what policies have been most effective. And also multi-level strategies. Let me stress this point, this is key. As a country, we need to increase the level of consistency and coherence through local agendas. Some regions have already started this activity. This should be a new way of preparing public plans. Participation and democracy are key. We want to raise awareness of values for this transformation process, and why not national legislation on participation to make this more systematic, creating constraints and opportunities, a stimulus that can help institutions, policy making and civil society to create a major convergence.
Well, and I'd like also to recall the major broadcasting organs, ANSA, Repubblica Sole 24 Ore, national newspapers, RAI. I mean, the most important networks that are there and should help us and support us and popularize, invest on a series of fundamental themes which in fact refer to this change objective and approach. There are two main conditions, pluralism and fundamental freedoms, but at the same time, they should contrast the online negative information, misinformation. One last element, and I would like to refer to the initial intervention by Marina Sereni, whom I thank again. We need eventually to strengthen, and our country, by the way, can play an important role in Europe and elsewhere. We need to give a new importance, new relevance to multilateralism. This is a decisive field in terms of our commitment, and especially considering the geopolitical situation. So I think we should really invest along this path. I no longer see my slide. I'm asking the control room to please let this slide on display and on the screen. I'd like to underline one last element. We should all work in a consistent manner, because both from the EU but at all other international level, because we need to strengthen the credibility of international institutions. The perspective should really increase the actions to support developing countries. Well, this is key if we wish and make a progress in our 2030 agenda and be consistent with it. Thank you for the attention. I mean, this very summary isn't a reward to our final notebook, but, you know, all our following actions will certainly reveal our commitment, and especially what we intend to do in order to be there in 2030. As Marina Sereni said, it'll be very hard to reach this goal, but we need to really work very hard in order to achieve these goals. And now let's move on and continue with our conference. And I would like to invite here on stage Giuseppina Paterniti, Director for the RAI Information Offer. I thank her for her presence here. And I would like to invite Rino Pellino, one of our correspondents from Berlin. Welcome and address to all of you. Well, the time has come to deep dive into commitment the EU has taken from the global ones, the Green Deal, the European Green Deal that should have led us to a sustainable and sustained transition. This has only been something put on paper, and which is proceeding at a very slow pace. Now let's connect with Brussels, where we welcome Mr. Donato Bendicenti, and let's start a sort of route and start from him to get to know where Europe is at now. And then we go to Paris and meet Giovanna Botteri to know what our neighboring countries are doing, especially the very large European countries, what they are doing now in terms of this energy transition, which should accompany us towards 2050. Donato, you have briefly the floor. You know, you have many commitments, engagements, so you have the floor.
Sì, molto brevemente. Intanto buongiorno a tutti, grazie.
Good morning. Thank you all.
Darei qualche dato per cominciare.
I've got a few
Il
figures to
cosiddetto
give
Green New
you.
Deal, quello che tu
The
citavi,
Green
direttrice,
Deal that you were mentioning,
l'ipotesi di una transizione verde serrata
providing
nei
for a
contenuti
short
e nei
transition
tempi,
in terms of timing
uno
and
dei pilastri
contents,
fondanti di
is
questo
one of the
governo
main
europeo.
pillars of this European
Nell'11
government.
dicembre del 2019,
On
quindi
the 11th
sostanzialmente a commissione
December
appena insediata,
2019,
quando venne presentato il piano
the
per questo
Commission at that
quinquennio,
time,
la
when being
transizione
submitted to
verde
this
e quella
5-year
digitale, che è
plan, well, the
strettamente
digital and green
connessa, ne
transition,
erano i punti
well,
fondanti. Poi
they
sappiamo
were the main
benissimo quello che è successo.
elements. Then we
2 mesi
know
dopo si
what
era
happened. A couple of months after
nell'incubo
that,
della pandemia,
we
però quel tipo di
were
vento
floating into the
non ha mai
pandemic
smesso di
nightmare.
accompagnare le politiche
But
europee,
that main
ovviamente tra molte
content
difficoltà.
never ever
Però
left
cominciamo con qualche dato.
European policies.
Allora,
But let's
il
start from
piano
some data.
pluriennale di
The
bilancio
multi-annual
dell'Unione Europea,
plan of the European
che va dal
budget,
2021 al
which
2027,
goes from
stanzia,
2021 through
ovviamente
27,
ripartendoli tra i 27 Paesi
allocates
membri,
among the
600
27
miliardi
countries
di euro.
Ah, eccola,
600
perfetto,
billion
benissimo.
euros.
Metto le cuffiette allora, ok, grazie.
We've got an interference in the connection, says the speaker.
Dicevo 600 miliardi
600
di
billion
euro
euros.
nel settennato 2021-2027
I mean, being
di
spread
questi 600
on this
miliardi, a
plan.
questi 600 miliardi
Out of
vanno poi aggiunte
this
una
amount,
nuova imputazione,
a new
diciamo così,
allocation
di
has been
nuovi
planned.
finanziamenti che
New
fa parte
fundings,
del REPower EU,
which
e ci
are
arrivo.
part
E
of
qual è
e-Power
l'idea
EU.
dell'Unione Europea?
What's
Qual
the
è
idea
sempre stata?
of the
Ovviamente lo dice
EU?
giustamente Giuseppina, tra
As
molti
you,
stop and go che sono
Giuseppina,
dovuti
said,
da
it was
da un primo shock che è
a sort
stato
of
quello
dirt road with
pandemico, un
the
secondo
various
shock
stops
che ha
and
un
goes.
impatto
The
che
first
lo
shock was
possiamo
the
valutare
epidemic.
con una
The
grande
second
facilità,
shock
drammatica facilità tutti i giorni,
is a dramatic
che è la
crisis
relazione tra l'invasione
that
russa
is
in
the
Ucraina e
relations
una crisi
between
energetica con
Ukraine
pochi
invasion
precedenti.
and the energy,
Bisogna
an
tornare agli anni
unprecedented
70 per avere quel
energy
tipo
crisis.
di
We have to go
quadro.
back to the
Ecco,
70s in order to
diciamo
see the
che
same, picture
l'obiettivo
again. Well,
dichiarato
the
dell'Unione
goal
Europea
declared by
era
the
quello
European
di
Union
arrivare al 2050
was to
senza più
reach
emissioni, quindi di
2050
diventare
with
un
zero
continente
emissions,
libero dalle
turning
emissioni, con
into a
uno
continent
step
free of
intermedio
emissions with
molto
an
ambizioso,
intermediate,
il
very
cosiddetto
ambitious
Fit for
step, the
55,
so-called
cioè l'idea
fifth
di
for
tagliare il
55,
55%
idea of
delle
cutting
emissioni, con
55% of
riferimento agli
emissions,
anni 90. Non entro in
of course with
tecnicismi, entro il
references to the
2030.
90s, by
L'obiettivo
2030.
ovviamente, so che ne
This
avete parlato
goal,
molto e
I
che ne parlerete
know
molto
you
in questa
talk about
giornata,
it
è
a lot,
puntare sulle
is
rinnovabili come
to, of course, focus
energia,
on the renewables,
fonte di energia
energy
primaria per il
sources,
futuro. E
as
su questo ci
primary energy
sono
for the future.
dei dati che in
And
qualche
indeed,
modo
we have
sono
some data
già interessanti.
that
Anche qui c'è
are
un
already
obiettivo:
of
le fonti
interest. Here again,
rinnovabili
we see an
dovrebbero
objective. Renewable
arrivare
energy
nel
sources
2030
by
al
2030
45% del
should
paniere. Già oggi
make
rappresentano
45% of the whole
il
basket.
37%
Today, they
della
account for
produzione di energia
37% of the overall
elettrica, e questo
energy
ovviamente è
and
un
power
dato
production. This
importante. Poi
is
non entro nella ripartizione
important.
tra
I won't
diverse
enter
fonti
into the
rinnovabili
breaking
perché
down of the
sennò
various energy
viene
sources
invitato alla
and
brevità
renewables
e vorrei
because I'd
accogliere
like to
il
be as
tuo
brief as possible.
invito. Però in tutto
But
questo è successo
looking
che
at
l'Unione
this,
Europea ha
what
deciso,
happened?
ha
The European
dovuto
Union
decidere di quali
had
fonti
to make a decision
approvvigionarsi, di
on
quale paniere di
what
fonti
kind of
approvvigionarsi per far
energy
fronte
sources to
all'approvvigionamento
use
complessivo,
in
stante il
order to
fatto che
face the
alcune
energy
fonti
demand.
tradizionali, faccio ad
Considering
esempio
that
gli
some
idrocarburi russi,
traditional energy, like the
venivano
Russian
progressivamente a
hydrocarbons,
mancare.
were
E allora si è provveduti a questa
progressively
analisi con una parola
decreasing.
molto, diciamo così,
So
poco, no, un po' complicata, che è tassonomia,
a
e si è
complex word
deciso di includere
was then
in
used.
questa
The word is
tassonomia, cioè il paniere delle
taxonomy.
fonti
Within
compatibili
this
con la
taxonomy, I
transizione
mean, the whole
ecologica, che
basket
è
of
l'obiettivo di
energy
fondo,
sources
anche il
compatible
gas
with ecological transition,
come
a gas was added
fonte di
as
transizione e
a
l'energia
transition
nucleare come
source
fonte di stabilizzazione. Voi
with
sapete
nuclear
perfettamente,
energy
tutti
as
noi
a
sappiamo
stabilization
perfettamente che in
energy
Europa
source. We
ci
all
sono due
know
partiti sull'energia
in
nucleare,
Europe we do
che
have
poi
two parties
portano
as
con
far as
sé in
nuclear energy
realtà
is concerned.
no, due
and they both
in qualche modo
represent
gruppi di stati, quello guidato dalla Francia,
two
e
state
ve ne parlerà
groups.
poi
The first
immagino
one led
Giovanna,
by France,
che
Giovanna
crede
possibly
molto
will
nell'energia
mention it,
nucleare, e quello
which is,
guidato dalla Germania
in
che
fact,
invece ha tutta
in
una serie di
nuclear
dubbi. In
energy,
tutto questo però
and
che cosa
Germany,
è successo? È
which
successo
have
che
a
il
different
quadro
division.
complessivo geopolitico
Well, the
è
overall
mutato perché
geopolitical
paradossalmente
framework
la performance
changed.
delle
Paradoxically,
energie
the
rinnovabili
performance of
durante i 2 anni di
renewable
pandemia è
energy
stata molto
sources
buona.
during the years of
E quindi,
pandemic was
diciamo così, questo ha
very good,
incoraggiato quel tipo di
which
percorso che poi
encouraged
tutti
this
qui da
type
Bruxelles
of
vedono
approach.
come
And from
una sorta
Brussels,
di evoluzione
they see
naturale, no?
this as a
Il
sort of
futuro è lì, lo
natural
dicono tutti,
development. This is where the
e ci sono
future
anche
stands.
alcuni dati molto interessanti
And
che
there are
poi
some
vengono
interesting
forniti
data they
dall'Eurobarometro. Ad
confirm it,
esempio,
which are
una larga parte dei
provided
cittadini europei
to the
pensa che
Eurobarometer.
alla fine la
The majority of
transizione
Europeans
verso le
think
energie
that the
rinnovabili non
transition
sarà
towards
soltanto
renewable
una
energy
cosa che
sources
aiuta
won't
la
just be
transizione verde
something
e anche la
helping
lotta al
this
riscaldamento
green
globale, ma
transition
sarà
and
una
fight
cosa
against
che nel
global
saldo
warming,
produrrà più
but
posti di lavoro
as a
di
balanced
quanto invece
result, it'll
non
create
ne
more
taglierà.
jobs,
E poi, diciamo
vis-a-vis
così, c'è il
cutting
tema
jobs.
dell'equità, perché
And then
ovviamente
here we
un'evoluzione di
see a
questo
new
tipo
theme, equity.
deve
Such an
far sì che tutti
evolution
quanti più o meno,
should
posso fare il caso
guarantee,
dell'agricoltura, che è un caso di
well,
scuola,
like the case of
è stata
agriculture,
approvata una nuova politica comune
a new
sull'agricoltura, e
European
l'imperativo di
policy
questa politica
has been
è
approved.
nessuno resti
The main
indietro, cosa ovviamente
objective
molto facile a dirsi,
of this
molto più
policy, nobody
complessa
has to be
a
left behind.
realizzarsi. E
This is
vi
very
do
easily
un
said than
ultimo dato,
done.
così non rubo
I
tempo ai
give you
miei
one last piece of
colleghi. Il
information.
Repower EU, perché? Perché a un certo
The
punto,
EU repower.
in questi mesi così drammatici,
Well, in the
visti di
past
liquida
dramatic
complessità
months,
sempre più
with
avanzate, sempre
ever-growing
più
complex
stringenti, ci si è
situations,
resi conto che
well,
bisognava
people
in qualche
realize
modo
that
ripotenziare
it was
quel
necessary to
modello di
reframe,
transizione ecologica
to support
avendo di
the ecological
fronte uno
transition
schema
model,
nuovo,
having
cioè la
today
necessità
to
di trovare
face a
fornitori
new
alternativi,
situation. They need to find
perché in questo
alternative
modo ovviamente nel momento in
suppliers,
cui poi si tratta banalmente,
and
no, di riscaldare le case, gli asili, gli
the
ospedali, gli
idea
uffici,
is
è chiaro che
that
il
of
piano
heating
della
hospitals, houses,
sostenibilità
etc.
va
Of course,
accompagnato dal
the
piano della
sustainability
necessità.
plan has to
E
be
quindi
corroborated
l'ultima
by the
cosa che
plan
vi
based on
dico in questo
necessity.
quadro europeo
One
tratteggiato
last
così
thing that
veramente
I
in
tell
modo
you
molto
now,
superficiale, ma
referring to
insomma per dare
Europe,
qualche
is kind of a
nozione di
superficial
fondo, e che si è deciso di
broad picture.
mettere sul piatto altri
Another decision was
220
made
miliardi
to allocate another
per il Repower
220
EU.
billion euros
Ultima
for the
informazione
EU
collegata,
Repower.
ultimo corollario,
One
con una
corollary
decisione
information,
recentissima il
a
Repower
very
EU è diventato
recent
un capitolo
decision by
dei piani
Repower
nazionali di
EU has become a
ripresa
new
e resilienza. Quindi, come
chapter
si dice da queste parti,
of
tout
the
se tient, tutto si
recovery
tiene insieme,
national
in un
plans.
quadro di oggettiva difficoltà in
So
cui
in this
probabilmente
difficult
gli obiettivi ambiziosi che questo
situation, the
governo
ambitious
europeo si era dato
objectives
all'inizio
the
dovranno
European
rimodularsi.
government gave
È
itself
anche
have to be
successo, diciamo così, che negli ultimi
rebalanced,
2 anni si sono
readjusted. In the
succedute una
past
serie di crisi
couple of
che
years,
davvero complicato, no?
criticisms
Andando indietro con la
were
memoria a
very
trovarne
harsh,
così tante e
and
così
it's
gravi.
very complex to find the same situations back in the years. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to leave the floor to Giovanna Botteri from Paris. Donato Bendicenti, in fact, repeated and said to what extent it was difficult to move from the very large utility companies, including their shareholders, profits, and etc., to move from something that is more shared, a capillary energy production network. I'm thinking of renewables now. We all had clear in mind that it wasn't a piece and hadn't be a piece of cake. Maybe there are people who were more focused on the economic situations. We imagined and envisaged a dramatic clash. I mean, nobody with power is, easily convinced and remit her power. Now, we are amidst a war and ecological transition. The nuclear energy and the gas are considered as something unavoidable for this transition. So, Giovanna, could you please make the point? We know in Italy there were many, many difficulties due to bureaucracy, signatures that were not good for issues relating to the energy communities. And while on the one hand, the country is more and more aware, and all citizens would like to have solar panels to cut their bills, at the same time, there is a sort of deceleration underway. How's the situation in Paris? We cannot hear you.
No? No? Non mi sentite ancora? Ah, va bene. Ecco, no, innanzitutto volevo salutare
First of all, I would like to say hello to our friends, Giuseppina, Rino, Donato,
tutti quelli
and
a
of
Roma.
course welcome
Per
all
fortuna oggi è una bella
the people
giornata di
gathered
sole
in
qui,
Rome.
quindi
It's a
i
sunny
nostri
day
problemi
here
di
today.
riscaldamento
Our
si
problems
allontanano
relating
di
to
un piccolo
the
passo, ma
heating
sicuramente una
are
cosa che
kind
angoscia molto in
of
questo
far
momento
now,
i
but
francesi. La situazione
certainly
della Francia
it's
è
a matter
particolare
of
perché ne ha accennato, no,
it's a
Donato?
problem for Parisians, as
Qui c'è il
Donato said.
nucleare, ci
Here we have the nuclear
sono una
energy.
ventina di
There's
centrali che
20
adesso
power
stanno
stations
velocemente
that are now
rientrando in
quickly
produzione, che dovrebbero assicurare
starting their
alla
production. They should
Francia
ensure France
energia
a
per tutto
sufficient amount
l'inverno,
of
forse anche per
energy to
l'Italia,
cover the
visto
whole
che
winter, and also
la
for
Francia
Italy, seeing
fornisce
that France
energia
provides
all'Italia. La
energy to
spinta per le
Italy. The
rinnovabili è
push
molto
towards
forte.
the
Ha fatto
renewables is
parte
very
del
strong.
programma di
It was part
Macron
of Macron's
per i primi suoi
program for
5 anni,
his
per il primo
first
quinquennato, fa parte
5 year
del
mandate.
programma di
It
Macron
is
per il
part
secondo
of Macron
quinquennato, anche
program
se
for
non
the
è
second
abbastanza,
5 year mandate,
criticano
even though it
i
is
verdi
so
francesi. C'è
critical
stata una spinta
for the
molto molto forte,
Greens.
non a
A
caso lo
very,
stesso
very
Macron ha
important
fatto un discorso
push.
durissimo
Macron
sulla
himself made a
necessità
very
quasi
harsh
disperata
speech on the
di
desperate
cambiare
need
completamente il nostro
to
punto di
fully
vista
change our
sull'approvvigionamento
perspective
energetico,
on
e il
energy
discorso è stato
procurement.
fatto a
His
Saint-Nazaire,
speech was done
dove
in
c'è il
Saint-Nazaire,
più grande
where
parco
the
eolico
largest
marino
marine
d'Europa, e un
wind
immenso
park
parco
is
eolico
located,
che
is a huge
riesce a soddisfare
wind
i bisogni di
farm
quasi 1
meeting
milione
the needs
di
of
persone. Il
approximately
problema
1
qual è
million
per
people.
Macron? Il
However,
problema è
what's
che
the problem
la
for
Francia,
Macron? Well,
secondo il
France,
piano di battaglia
according to
varato quasi 6 anni
a
fa, dovrebbe
plan
essere
approved 6
completamente
years ago,
indipendente, quindi
should
usufruire di
be totally
energie
independent.
verdi
So you
alternative per la
seeing
totalità dei suoi
alternative green
fabbisogni non
energies,
prima del
not
qualcuno dice
someone says not
2050
before
e più positivi. Quindi
2060
che
or
cosa fare fino a
2050.
quella
So what to
data?
do up to
Per
that
Macron la
time?
risposta è
For
evidente,
Macron,
e
there is
il
quick
nucleare.
answer.
Qua si parla
The
molto di
nuclear
questo nucleare
energy.
di terza
People
generazione, che
talk
dovrebbe
about the
essere
third
il più
generation
ecologico, il
nuclear
più pulito,
energy, more
il più sicuro.
ecological, cleaner,
Certamente di sicuro
safer.
c'è che le centrali
Certainly,
attualmente in
one
funzione
thing
sono
is
56 in
sure,
Francia, non
nuclear power
sono di terza
stations, 50
generazione. Si stanno
number,
costruendo
aren't third
25
generation.
nuove
Once
centrali, e queste
25
naturalmente
new power stations have
saranno
been built, and
opereranno
they'll certainly
fra
be
5-6 anni, e sono
operating
fatte secondo questa nuova
in
idea di
5, 6 years' time.
nucleare e
This new idea
pulito
of the nuclear energy,
sicuro.
which is clean and
In
safe.
questo momento la Francia in
And
realtà non ha
today, France
bisogno del
doesn't
gas
need
russo. Il problema
the
per la Francia
Russian
sono i
gas.
prezzi, è per
The
questo, no,
problem
che
for
qui per
France
esempio
is just
all'interno
related to
del
prices. This
paese è
is
già stato
why
stabilito
in
un
the
tetto
country a
per i
new
prezzi dell'energia, per
ceiling
i
has
prezzi
been
dell'elettricità, e
established
questo è
for the energy
importante.
prices,
Giuseppina, è
etc. And that's
importante perché io non sono
fundamental. Dear
riuscita,
Giuseppina,
volevo portarvi la mia
I
bolletta,
really
cioè le
wanted to
bollette
take and show you my bill.
di ottobre
For the month of October,
hanno lo 0,5 in
they
meno
have
delle bollette del mese precedente, cioè qui le bollette grazie al tetto
0.5% less thanks to this
dell'elettricità
ceiling
e
on
del
electricity
gas
bills and gas
sono
bills.
calate, quindi
They
è evidente
decreased.
che c'è
I mean,
un'azione
of
politica
course,
interna,
behind
c'è
that
un'azione
there
politica a
is an
livello
internal political
europeo e a livello
action on a
europeo c'è questa
European
forte
level as
spinta
well,
per
and there is
utilizzare il nucleare
an
da una
important
parte e
move to
per
use
lavorare alle
nuclear energy on the one
rinnovabili. Tu
hand and
accennavi
work
ai
on
problemi che ci
renewables on the
sono
other.
in
You
Italia. Io posso
hinted
dirti in
at the
modo
problems we have in
così,
Italy.
molto
I can
semplice,
say in a
molto
very
basico.
simplistic
Qui
and basic
mettere
manner,
i
well,
pannelli
here,
solari sui tetti è molto più
installation of
facile
solar panels is
che in
easy,
Italia. I permessi vengono
much
dati
easier than
quasi
in Italy.
subito
Permits are given
e
right
ci
away.
sono
And
incentivi
there are,
importanti che
of
stanno
course, important
funzionando
incentives
benissimo,
that are working very well,
soprattutto nelle
especially
campagne, forse addirittura più nelle
in
campagne che
the country
nelle grandi città. Ci
side,
sono interi
perhaps
paesi che hanno
much better
con
than in
totale
the cities.
autonomia
There are villages and
energetica
towns that are
grazie
fully
al
independent from
rinnovamento.
an
Poi ci sono
energy
tutta
point
una
of view,
serie
thanks to this
di sistemi,
renewal.
le
And there
stufe
are
a
other
pelle, insomma,
systems,
c'è
pellet
un
ovens,
sistema
etc. I mean,
di
there is
incentivazione che
a system
sta
based on
funzionando
bonuses,
molto
incentives, which
di
is quite
fronte ad una sensibilità dell'opinione
performing.
pubblica che qui in Francia è
Vis-a-vis the
molto
new
molto alta
awareness of the public
su
opinion,
questi
which
temi.
is
Quindi
very, very
io direi
high on
che
this,
dalla
focused on these
Francia
themes.
arriva una
So
bella
from
apertura su
France, I
quello
would
che
say,
potrebbe essere
I
e
see a
probabilmente dovrebbe
very
essere il nostro
good
futuro
opening on
energetico
the
verde
future that
alternativo.
could be also our own green alternative future. Thank you, Giovanna. It is quite encouraging. At the same time, we understand to what extent the situation in Europe is complex. We're not all the same. Perhaps our dependence on gas, as Italy and Germany, even though the Germans do depend much more than we do from Russia. Probably, I'm asking you, Rino, would be interesting to understand what happened before. I mean, it is easy to say, well, who's the culprit? Well, the war. Of course, this is a dramatic crisis. However, here we are unveiling a sort of hypocrisy. How was the past towards the renewables before? Well, ecological transition is like a layered pie. Ecological transition means that there are so many other aspects to take into account, not just the energy. Think about the waste disposal and processing. And I'm speaking of Rome, we are really backward. I was a student, I remember in the 80s, well, already the Germans were picking their waste. What does it mean? There is new and disseminated culture in Germany on how to differentiate, on how to dispose of waste. Years ago, I was in Berlin to the they have a huge waste disposal site, but they only collect what couldn't be disposed in another way, and everything has to be disposed. Germany has so many lights, but so many shadows, especially if we talk about energy. As for gas, in the past few months and weeks, so many yes were said. We Italians, well, we were the first ones to look for the Russian gas in the 60s. Mr. Mattei and Chefis, we were pioneers and educated Germany, who at that time with Chancellor Schmidt decided and negotiate like this. We give you technology, you give us gas. We give you technology for steel. I mean, it wasn't a transition based on money. This is where all started. Actually, saying that the culprit is what happened in the past few governments is wrong, in my opinion. It was a situation which existed before Schmidt fell. Someone says in Germany, at least, he fell because Mr. Reagan didn't want that gas duct. And in fact, the liberals at that time changed Prime Minister Kohl, came to power, and Kohl continued with the building of the gasoduct. Whatever the political party, Christian Democrats, liberals, it didn't change. So now, here we are and talk about fossil fuels or renewable energy sources. During the electoral campaign, the Greens said, well, we have to cut Nord Stream. Habeck was convinced, as the Minister of Industry. They didn't listen. They wanted to close this. They didn't want to have the gas duct being opened because there was already a Nord Stream 1. As soon as they came to power, they said, well, we have to keep the gas, otherwise we don't know how to have a fully performing industrial system and also our overall heating system. They made a step backward, but in fact, there was already a program to shorten the time, to provide for the whole of the necessities covered by renewable energies. They had a deadline, 2040. Donato said it on a European level, the date is 2050. Let's shorten the time of dismissing, the use of coal, which was still necessary to keep the eastern region still productive, like the area around Berlin, Brandenburg. So many things weren't even debated. The nuclear energy wasn't even a matter of discussion because they only have 3 nuclear power stations to be decommissioned from 31st December this year. The war was the major divide because people feared, first, not to prepare the right stock or warehouses, not having enough gas available. And then they went around saying, well, Russia is not relatable, is not to be trusted, it's not a democracy. And then they went and buy gas in Qatar. Not so democratic. So they started and looked for gas around, looking for new procurement sources. One of the most reliable ones is Norway. They decided an increased production. And also the program was slowing down, a program which was approved only a few months before on the implementation of the energy renewable sources. The problem is that the money to allocate the money, which was still a matter of debate in terms of the amount, 50 billion euros for the implementation of hydrogen. In Germany, there's 1 million columns to recharge electric cars, very few for an 80 million vehicles country. So many other columns had to be built, and a fee had to be removed because it has to be used to support the wind farms. This money was allocated to other things, and the Bundeswehr was and is now living through a very severe situation. So 100 billion euros were allocated to reset, to renovate, to support the army. And then 200 billion to be allocated to energy, to green energy policies, without distinguishing, without stating why and for what. So the lignite power stations were restarted, So the objective to reduce CO2 before the time established, well, that won't be achieved. Habeck and Scholz was saying we cannot continue with the nuclear power stations because we don't have uranium. The uranium bars have to be bought on purpose for those very nuclear power stations. So they will go on with their production at least up to the second half of next year. And gas is still used. Maybe the wind farms will be used more, but we don't know yet how and what kind of fundings. So as soon as the people had to discuss the new situation, just as Mrs. Merkel did, she was the Green Chancellor. But when in the meetings in Brussels, she used to stop objectives on emissions. She blocked the idea of lowering emissions from cars. Why? To defend their industry. So the fight for energy, especially in the last century and a half, was based on power. Energy means power. Oil means power, not only in the public hands, but also in the private ones. The very large American multinational corporations, well, we all know what they have been and what they are. It's a kind of short-sighted to think that all of a sudden all of these interests vanished. Well, if you think that you can put aside, into brackets, also the Russian gas is a power-based struggle. All multinational companies that manage the fossil fuels, it's impossible to think that they simply make room to the other solutions. And allowing everyone and all to put solar panels on their roofs. Well, thank you. It is very clear that these objectives, and indeed, as Asvis, what you have included in your program, the idea of sustainable economy, in this very case, is an economy just opposed to ecological transition. I mean, as a whole.
So we are going backwards in a continent that is supposedly leader in terms of ecological transition. So thanks to our guests, Giovanna Botteri, Donato Bendicenti. I hope I can see you when we can tell about steps forward. Now we have William Villay, General Coordinator of AFSA, Chiara Cardoletti from UNHCR, she's just joining us, Luca Maestri Pieri, the Director of the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation, and also Massimo Gaudina, Head of the Italian representation of the European Commission to Milan. Thank you for being with us. So, not only Europe, we also have the rest of the world. Europe has a commitment towards developing countries and not only. And this is not generosity, this is justice, walking all together along the same direction to save the planet. William Billet is with us now? Not yet. So, Chiara Cardoletti, UNHCR. addresses the tragedy caused in developing countries by climate change and climate crisis. We are underestimating, I think, at least when it comes to the public opinion, the impact of the climate crisis on those who flee desertified areas, the so-called climate refugees. This is a label, if you like, but indeed entire countries and regions are affected by climate crisis. About the current situation, first of all, I thank Asvis for involving us. This is a major topic. Climate change is topical right now. The temperature is rising, but very little is being said about how these are human crises. Lately, we did surveys on Italian cooperation. We asked, what do you mean by climate crisis? And those mentioning individuals were very few, less than 2%. So few people understand how climate change impacts upon people. Refugees, environmental refugees, they call them. Well, we think there are three aspects to consider. More and more climate change is having a strong, heavy impact on the generation of flows of people, both internally and abroad, refugees. This is even more relevant in poor countries where food safety is limited, where governance is poor, and so adding this up to climate change, conflicts become very strong, very harsh. For instance, northern Cameroon, where the Chad Lake, that used to be a major resource, is now almost dry, and agricultural communities and nomadic communities there are having harsh relations because there is scanty water. They look for water everywhere, and so there are conflicts, not small conflicts, thousands of refugees fled to bordering countries. Elsewhere, Somalia, for instance, for decades now, their people have been suffering from famine and conflicts, and now climate change. So we have millions of refugees, and we don't know who they are, economic, environmental refugees, or are they just refugees according to the 1951 Convention? It doesn't make much of a difference. These people flee for a multitude of reasons. It's very hard to understand how to react, how to respond to this. Also, most refugees, most displaced people come from very fragile countries, environmentally speaking. Close to 80% of refugees come from countries suffering major climate changes and natural disasters like Pakistan. Pakistan right now, Pakistan suffers from floods and earthquakes. It's an asylum country. Local communities sharing their country with 1 million refugees can hardly handle natural catastrophes, most of which happen in areas where refugees go. So a very high level of complexity, environmental conditions, climate change, plus host communities that hardly share the scanty resources that they have. So it's three major issues that we're trying to run globally through several arrangements, including the Global Pact on Refugees. We want to help countries generating or receiving refugees. So what about Italian cooperation in the face of this topic? I thank Asvis for this opportunity. We had a very severe pandemic, which made our life hard. Now we have the war, so it's not easy, but indeed, sustainable development is the core aspect for us from the development community, development cooperation community. The international community is submitting the 2030 agenda to the fore. We have a new agreement on development finance and climate change, so our agency has a very specific mandate and mission entrusted by the Italian government. So our goals are well defined. Now we are getting organized to place ecological transition at the center of our efforts. We have a dedicated office running environmental projects. We are creating new tools based on indicators witnessing to the importance attached to ecological transition by us. Disadvantaged groups, women, vulnerable groups, and so forth. So the environment is at the center of our action. We have 18 offices across 5 continents, mainly in Africa. We will soon open an office in Niger, a country that is suffering from the consequences of climate change. Crisis induced by the war has determined consequences in terms of exacerbating the food crisis, for example. The sectors where we are focusing now is, of course, energy. Rise energy price in Africa, it's not a matter of price, it's a matter of energy. They have very little energy, and it's not the price of energy, it's that they don't have any energy. We have to bring energy to them. So in those countries, we try to promote renewable sources, but as I said, people cannot wait for too long in their daily activities. So it's also a matter of funds. Bringing energy means huge funds from the private sector and major banks. What can we do as a development cooperation agency? We can find our own space and make a difference in the most distant and vulnerable areas, because large, the big companies, of course, need funds well beyond public development aid. Traveling around the world, I visited, shepherds in certain rural areas of Kenya. Even a small plant generating electricity to survive based on the production of animal feces is already something very important for them. Another major topic is the cities. We are committed on several fronts. In megalopolis, we try to mitigate the living conditions of the slums. In Ethiopia, Mozambique, Kenya, they really go through difficult conditions. We try to help those people trying to re-establish environmental life conditions that are sustainable. This is part of our efforts. Next week, invited by the city of Milan, I will attend a major meeting in Brazil, in Rio, the follow-up of the famous Charter of Milan, a follow-up of the Milan Expo, to discuss sustainability and food safety. The cities can develop good practices and we will select those good practices. Rio de Janeiro is very important vis-a-vis the environmental global theme. Water is as important, rational use of water resources, be it for personal use or for agriculture or for the industry. What's important? Waste. We have a number of projects addressing waste disposal, as well as the entire waste management cycle to minimize the production of waste. The Italian cooperation is also committed on this front. We have profit and no-profit organizations cooperating with us. So our expertise is at the disposal of partner countries where we operate, always in terms of ecological transition.
Now the floor to Massimo, head of European Commission in Milan. Massimo, we've met long ago in Brussels. However, the overall framework is that on the one hand, we have Europe, which is pointing to becoming the leader. However, facing several crises, the latest is the war, but there's a block with the powerful groups, the energy groups, and the leadership commitment Europe should play on a global level. Otherwise, it runs the risk not having any direction, any horizon So with the objective of thinking about a sustainable development, well, the European commitment, being idealistic and highly contrasted, is the only concrete commitment with respect to what other countries do, like China, United States, and other world and global polluters. So the question is, how can Europe find new tracks? And following the Green New Deal today, how do you see the situation?
Grazie Giuseppina, buongiorno a tutti. Un saluto
Thank you,
da Bruxelles, sono
Giuseppina. Good
collegato qui
morning.
perché per
Welcome
una serie
to
di
all of you from
riunioni, spero che il
Brussels. I'm here
collegamento
for a
funzioni bene.
series of meetings. I hope
È una domanda molto interessante
to
perché mi
have
permette
a
di
flawless
ricordare
connection.
alcuni dati che ci
I'd
fanno
like to
capire
remind
che
you
l'Europa
some
comunque
data to
resta
understand
leader in
that
questa
Europe
lotta al cambiamento
remains
climatico.
the leader in the
Noi in
fight
questi
against
ultimi 30
climate
anni
change.
siamo
In
cresciuti
the
dal punto
past
di vista del
30
PIL
years,
europeo
we
complessivamente
have
del
grown in
60%
terms
e
of GDP by
contemporaneamente abbiamo abbassato di
60%
oltre il
overall,
25%
and at
le
the
emissioni
same
di
time
CO2,
we lowered
che
by
significa che si
25%
può
our
crescere e
CO2
inquinare di
emissions,
meno al
which
tempo
means we
stesso
can
e
grow
su
and
questo l'Europa è stato ed
pollute
è un
less at the
modello.
same time. So in this
E poi
sense, Europe is
abbiamo
a champion.
una vera e propria
And
legge
now
europea, siamo l'unico
we have a
continente con una
European law.
legge
We're the only continent
vincolante
with a
per i
proper
Paesi membri
law,
che
a
impone
constraining law for
i
member
vari
states,
target del Green
which
Deal e in
imposes
particolare
Green Deal targets,
l'obiettivo
in
intermedio del
particular the
2030 con la
intermediate
riduzione del
2030 objective, providing for a
55%
reduction by
di CO2 entro
55%
il 2030
of
e poi
CO2 emissions by
con l'obiettivo finale
2030 and the
dell'impatto
ultimate
climatico
goal
zero.
of
Mi piace
zero
ricordare
emissions
le parole di
for
Franz
climate
Timmermans, il
impact.
nostro primo
I'd like to remind
vicepresidente,
of the
che
words of our
ricorda
first
sempre che
Vice
fino a 2
President
anni fa
Zimmerman.
era
He
soltanto il
reminds us
20%
that
delle
until
economie
2 years ago,
mondiali
only
che avevano questo
20% of
obiettivo
the global
dell'impatto
economies
climatico zero
had the
e adesso siamo
same
invece al 70% delle
goal of
economie
zero
mondiali, quindi stiamo
impact.
andando tutti
Now
nella stessa
the
direzione,
data
anche
gives
se
a
con
different
tempistiche
percentage,
diverse. Questo continua
60%.
ad essere
So
un punto
even
su
with
cui
different
bisogna lavorare
timings,
molto.
this
Questo
is
soltanto
still a
per
point
definire il ruolo
to be really
dell'Europa
taken into
in
account.
questa grande lotta.
Just to define the role
Io
of
penso che
Europe
con la
today.
crisi attuale, con la
I
guerra
think that
attuale,
due to the current
così
crisis,
come è successo
war,
con il Covid, con la
as it
pandemia del
happened
Covid,
during COVID and
l'effetto finale sarà
pandemic,
quello di
the final
accelerazione del
effect
Green
will
Deal e
be an
questo è molto importante
acceleration of the
da
Green
ricordare
Deal, which
perché
is very
con i
important
vaccini,
to
con la pandemia,
remind.
inizialmente c'è stato evidentemente lo shock e
Through the use of vaccines,
la
well,
lentezza
there
in
was
qualche
a
modo anche della
shock,
risposta europea, poi c'è stata questa
a very
straordinaria
slow
risposta sui
response
vaccini,
from Europe,
ma sul piano
and then an
economico c'è stato il
extraordinary
Next
response
Generation
as
che
far
si è
as vaccines
inserito
are
sul Green
concerned.
Deal
And
che
then
era
the
appena
next
stato varato prima
generation was
della pandemia.
included on the
Next
Green
Generation
Deal,
che
which was just approved
propone e
before the
prevede una serie di
pandemic,
misure
which
per i
provides
paesi più
for a
colpiti e
series of
l'Italia più di
measures
tutti,
for the
che si basano
mostly
in
affected
grandissima
countries,
parte proprio
Italy
sulla
among the
transizione
first
verde.
ones,
Voi sapete che il
that are really focused on
37%
green
almeno
transition,
dei fondi di ciascun
37% at least
PNRR in
of
ciascun
funds of
paese
each
deve
and
essere
every
destinato alla crescita verde,
national
alla
plan
crescita
has to be
sostenibile. Quindi
allocated for a
il Next
sustainable
Generation, ricordiamolo, è proprio
development.
figlio della
Next
crisi del
generation
Covid, quindi
is
c'è
in
stata una
fact the son
risposta che ha
of
dato nuovi
COVID
strumenti per
crisis, a
affrontare
new
una crescita
response, new
sostenibile.
tools to
Sulla
tackle
guerra
a
sta succedendo la
sustainable
stessa
development.
cosa.
As for
C'è
the war,
un'accelerazione in buona parte
it's the
degli
same.
obiettivi
There
del Green
is
Deal e
an
degli
acceleration
strumenti
of Green Deal
che sono gli
objectives
strumenti
and the
del Green Deal.
instruments
Faccio qualche esempio.
which
Sugli obiettivi del
constitute it.
2030 si vuole
Like
accelerare e
2030
non
goals,
diminuire
an acceleration
sull'efficienza
is required
energetica,
and
che
not a
dovrebbe passare
decrease
dal
in terms
9 al
of energy efficiency,
13%.
moving from 9 to
Sulle rinnovabili
13%.
si vuole
As for the
passare dal
renewables,
40 al
from 40 to
45%. Questi sono obiettivi,
45%.
ma sono obiettivi che
For
sono
these
proprio dovuti alla necessità di
objectives due to
dipendere
the
di meno
need to
dal gas
depend
russo e
less
quindi
and less
accelerare
from the
su tutto
Russian
quello che è
gas,
alternativo.
thus
Per
accelerating
esempio anche sulla
with
diversificazione,
alternative
diversificazione delle fonti. Ci
energy,
sono più di
like
30
diversifying
miliardi
sources,
di,
over 30 billion
centimetri cubi di gas
cubic
che
centimeters
sono
of
stati già
gas have
accordati,
already
sono stati già
been
acquistati
agreed upon,
dall'Unione Europea e dai
hence
vari paesi
purchased
europei
by the
da altri
EU and
fornitori, dalla
member
Norvegia,
states
dal
from
Regno Unito,
other suppliers
dall'Azerbaigian,
from
dal Nord Africa,
Norway,
eccetera. Quindi
Azerbaijan,
c'è anche il lato
Northern African
diversificazione,
countries. I
c'è il
mean,
lato importantissimo del
diversifying is a
risparmio
key word.
energetico, dove ci
Other
sono dei
point,
target
energy
molto stringenti
saving.
di cui si sta
There we
parlando,
have
dove si vuole
targets
diminuire
The
Si vuole
idea is
aumentare l'efficienza
to
energetica, si vuole diminuire
increase
la
energy
domanda di gas
efficiency by
di
decreasing
un
gas demand
15% per ogni
by
paese, e così ogni
15%
paese può
in each
seguire
and every
su
country.
base
Every
volontaria
country
con i
has a
metodi che ogni paese può
voluntary
decidere, salvo in caso di allerta, di
room for
emergenza vera,
maneuvering,
allora questo 15%
with the exception
diventa
of
un
real and proper
target
alerts in terms
obbligatorio.
of energy. And in
E
this case,
quindi ci
this
sono una serie di
target
misure
turns
che in
into
qualche
a
modo
mandatory
stanno,
one. There
per
are other
rispondere alla
measures
crisi da guerra, stanno
that
accelerando su
are
alcuni degli
there to
aspetti fondamentali del Green Deal.
accelerate some
Ne
of
aggiungo
the
ancora uno,
fundamental aspects
ed è
of the
quello
Green Deal. I'd
dell'idrogeno, di
like
cui
to
avete
add
già
a further one,
parlato. La Presidente
hydrogen.
von der
You already
Leyen ha
mentioned
proposto
hydrogen.
recentemente di
President von der
creare una
Leyen
banca
recently
europea
proposed to
dell'idrogeno
create a
che
European
vuole
Bank of
in
Hydrogen
qualche modo risolvere il problema
to
degli investimenti
solve the problem
in questo
of
settore, e
investments
vuole
in
facilitare
this
la produzione e
industry,
l'importazione
thus making it
di,
easier the import and
milioni
production
di
of millions
tonnellate di
of
idrogeno nei prossimi
tons
10
of
anni. È una grande
hydrogen in
sfida
the
che
next
richiede grandi
decade. It's a
investimenti,
great
richiede molta
challenge
ricerca
requiring
scientifica,
huge
ma
investments, a lot of
è la strada
scientific
che
research.
bisogna
However, this
assolutamente
is the
compiere.
avenue.
Quindi in qualche modo
And
il Green Deal continua,
the Green Deal
e su alcuni
goes
aspetti, su molti
on,
aspetti addirittura
and as for
viene
several
accelerato.
aspects,
Dopodiché c'è tutto il
we see
discorso
an
della crisi
acceleration.
energetica, e la
And then
prossima settimana c'è,
the
come sapete, il
situation
Consiglio
related to
europeo
the
che
energy
se
crisis,
ne
and in
occuperà,
fact,
e la
next
Commissione sta
week a
preparando
European Council has been organized. And in
specifiche
fact,
e i
in
suoi
this case,
strumenti, che
new
saranno discussi dai capi
specifications,
di
new
Stato
tools
e
will
di
be
governo.
discussed by the head of state and governments. Thank you, Massimo. Let's complete this round. It's back to you. In this case, I have some questions to and for you. Of course, we all feel the energy of certain plans drafted in Europe. However, in Italy, we only hear people speaking about drilling, um, and we never hear the word community energy. There aren't still the signatures on decrees to unlock these energy communities that have already been decided upon in Europe. The idea is to acquire a European directive. So there are some contradictions typical of different ideas, and in this case, we are not so simplistic in our idea, because when something is decided on a political level, then we have to consider the economic effects. So development has to follow some clear direction. I'd like to go back to Chiara Gabaletti and ask her, well, the situation is indeed very, very complex and has even worsened due to the war. Sustainability today is much more complex if compared to some time ago. Respect to January of last year. Now, what do you ask today to governments? Because the theme of refugees and migrants is at the very center of attention of the next European governments. Well, for us, the objective is to make the host countries of refugees that are very fragile from an environmental point of view, I mean, to make their work easier so that people can settle there. That's one of our most important objectives until the time they can go back home. We have to work consistently and listen to the hosting communities. The processes by which climate changes are managed, environmental issues are handled, do include the communities that are in the front, in the forefront. So this is fundamental for us. The second thing, these countries that are in the forefront and that are ecologically fragile and subject to climate changes, which makes the situation more complex, they have to be financially supported to continue their work, the work they do in a very well to work to host refugees. 80% of where refugees are, well, their climate is really a fragile issue. They are very fragile. So the other point is to invest on adaptability of communities and prevention. Never expect that the communities are ready or possibly they have to leave the country, but try and prevent and help communities that are already in the forefront, as I said, where problems like drought exist or famine. I mean, helping such communities to be more resilient. This is a necessity, but we need investments and not wait till the last minute where, of course, there are refugees, whatever their nature. Actually, people leave the country because of conflicts or because of the absence of something important. So before investing in adaptability, we do represent the international community, being part of the United Nations, and for us it's very important that as for our operations, considering the number of refugees we handle, necessary to make our operations more and more sustainable and greener. This is why the High Commissioner, by the way, is Italian, has set this as a priority. Of course, we need governments help us and continue our efforts. If our priorities are to ensure and provide food to refugees in their camps, in fact, we can invest less in other green activities. The Italian government, I must say, is really meeting our expectations. I was in Sudan with the joint mission with the Italian government, and we saw projects financed by Italy, which were aimed at introducing solar panels in refugee camps. This is not a good thing because, of course, such operations are greener, but at the same time, such refugees can possibly study at night or carry on with their projects aiming at turning into more independent communities, more adaptable, instead of seeing refugees who are compelled and leave such places because they have no alternatives. So for us, this is a very important sector. So we ask the international community to include the environmental issues, the climate change, whenever they wish and finance our operations. Thank you. Well, that was a big compliment. It's a very nice medal to put on your lapel. Now, what is the possible feasible? Are there margins to increase your presence? Yes, that's a compliment to, I believe, the whole of the Italian cooperation, which is made up of so many people and bodies. Now, however, there is a point I'd like to underline. I mentioned the actions, the interventions made abroad. The Italian cooperation hasn't got the right structure and numbers. I'm thinking of the governmental cooperation to be on equal footing with other international cooperation systems. However, it's quite diffused, it's made up of so many actors, and maybe our biggest role, and this is why such an event like today's event, well, in June, as the Deputy Minister said, we organized a conference for cooperation. This is a meeting which has been organized every 3 years. I mean, these events have to be more frequently organized because our citizens have to be informed of the many actions that we carry out in emergency situations or in development areas where we have strict relations with the local authority. Where we operate, we act based on programs, on multi-annual plans. Of course, there are emergencies, as my colleague said. There are times where we have to cope with sort of firefighting actions to avoid severe consequences. However, there are proper cooperation operations where we have to act in terms of prevention and multi-annual interventions for specific communities, local communities above all, because whenever we go there, we realize how vast these challenges are. So the Italian cooperation should intervene with its creative attitude. We have the resources, the willpower. Of course, our resources are limited. It's not only a matter of quantity, but of quality. Certainly, we bring about the idea of quality first. I never saw intervention by the Italian cooperation system. Of course, in the past, in the 80s, today the situation changed. And whenever Italian is there as a cooperation, we are safe and sure that everything is being implemented consistently with the objective stated for the financing. We need to communicate this on a national level, where very often people ask, wow, why the development cooperation? Well, because we enhance the best resources that we have. When I speak of resources, I'm not only referring to the financial ones, but the human resources, the human capital. And Italy is really rich in this sense. And also our technologies, the world of universities, the academic world, which is very careful in terms of sustainable development. This is why we do make the difference whenever we develop our actions. So thank you very much also from us. It's not to be dismissed, you know, this idea. In the past few years, we saw the stepwise cutting of aids allocated to development projects because the attention was put on the national budgets. However, the theme of quality intervention and keeping very high the bar in terms of resources, it's a leitmotiv and it's typical of Italians, so we can certainly thank you on behalf of us all. I'd like to go back to Massimo Gaudina, who's listening to us from Brussels. Yes.
Sì.
And now I'd like again to talk about Europe. Europe should be fully committed as a leader globally. It is true we need to proceed calmly because the war shouldn't become a stumbling block, closing from our view our horizon that for our democracy means life. We cannot forget that younger generations thinking about their participation, they think about democracy, and they are strongly oriented towards sustainable development, and hence the future of the planet. So since we know how the world will end, and it's a sort of a rush, as our correspondents are saying, it's a rush towards energy sources we never ever thought of resorting to today. The idea is what kind of actions can be implemented, what kind of checks and controls can the European Commission implement in order to avoid and be off track. One thing is to be all engaged in a rush. Other thing is that the so-called Italian bureaucratic activities that have to be applied to implement renewables are finally simplified. Who is there in charge of the controls from the
C'è
European
sicuramente anche un
Union?
lato di controllo. In questo momento noi dobbiamo
Of course, the
incentivare la
controls
transizione
are
più che
that way. Of
controllarla.
course, we have
È
to
chiaro che
support
c'è un bisogno
the
di collaborare a tutti i
transition.
livelli, non
Well, if you do not support the renewable energy sources or alternative options, what has got the European Union
si
as
accompagnano.
instrument
Beh,
to
intanto c'è lo
control
strumento
this
nazionale che è il
process?
Piano Nazionale
Well,
Energia e
the
Clima che ogni paese
Energy and
deve
Climate
presentare
National
ogni
Plan,
anno o
every
ogni
country has to submit. This
periodo
is a first form
pluriennale,
of control. It's a
cosiddetto
multi-annual
PNIEC,
plan. It is called
che
the
prevede
PNIEC,
tutta una serie di misure che poi vengono
providing for
coordinate a
certain
livello europeo e
measures
vengono
then
verificate. Diciamo, la
coordinated
verifica
at the
vera si fa
European
sul
level
PNRR
and
e quindi
verified.
sui
The
cosiddetti
actual
targets and
verification is
milestones
done
del
on the
PNRR, cioè
so-called
gli obiettivi
targets
e,
and
e,
milestones
e le
of
pietre
the
miliari, le
plan
milestones di questo
recovery. The
piano, in
milestones
cui
of
la
this
Commissione verifica
plan
con i vari governi, compreso quello italiano, se
used
quello
to
che era
control
previsto nel piano e in questo
whether
calendario
what
di
had been
obiettivi
provided in this
intermedi, di
National
tappi
Recovery
intermedi, era stato
Resilience
rispettato
Plan
oppure no. Quindi da
was
questo punto di
fully
vista
respected or not.
c'è una
And
cooperazione, una
I believe
vicinanza e
that
una collaborazione molto,
cooperation
molto
is
piena, perché ricordiamo che se questi
full in this
milestones e
sense.
targets non vengono
If milestones
rispettati,
and
le
targets aren't
rate
respected,
e
the
i fondi
installments
che dovrebbero
and
provenire dal Next
therefore
Generation
funds
non vengono
to
erogati. Quindi
be
è
provided from
evidente che
this next
c'è tutto
generation
l'interesse di
won't
seguire
be
i piani
delivered.
previsti.
So the
Questo
idea
vale
is
per
to
il
really stick to
PNRR.
the plan.
Prego.
Sorry to interrupt you. Whoever comes to the government, whoever wishes and change, cannot change a lot, if I'm not
Ci
mistaken.
sono dei piccoli margini in
There
cui
are
si
small
possono prevedere
margins
delle modifiche anche al
and
PNRR
certain
in modo
changes
limitato, in
can
modo
be
mirato, in modo
provided for to this National Recovery
giustificato
Resilience
da
Plan in a
eventi eccezionali
justified manner,
o da tutte le
justified by
clausole che sono
exceptional
previste
events or all the clauses
nell'accordo che è
provided
stato
for
firmato.
in the agreement
Però
signed.
tutto questo deve rientrare in una
However,
fase
all
ovviamente
this has
di
to be
accordo
part
non solo
of
con
an
la
overall
Commissione, ma
agreement
anche con tutti gli
framework, not
altri
only
Paesi
with the
membri, perché
Commission, but
poi
with
è il
all
Consiglio
other
che
the
può
other
dare la
European
verifica
member
finale
states, because
rispetto
only the Council can
rispetto a
provide the
questi
final
cambiamenti e quindi
green
tutti i
light
paesi che in
to
qualche
these
modo in modo
changes.
solidale hanno
All countries who
contribuito al
altogether
grosso investimento
contributed to the
sull'Italia,
huge
perché
investment on
ricordiamo che
Italy. I
le
remind you
sovvenzioni del
that
PNRR, cioè un terzo
the
dell'intero PNRR,
an
è a fondo
RRP
perduto cosiddetto,
is
cioè non sono
a
debiti
lump
che
sum.
l'Italia
These are
deve restituire,
not
ma sono
debts to
sovvenzioni
be
che vengono poi
reimbursed. These are
ripagate sui
sort of
mercati
grants
finanziari da tutti i
that are
27.
repaid
Quindi c'è stato uno
on the
sforzo
financial
di
markets by the
solidarietà degli altri paesi
27
che quindi
countries.
hanno
It's a
anche
solidarity
tutto
effort,
l'interesse a vedere che i piani vadano come
and the
previsti.
interest
Per
is
cui
that the
il
plans
meccanismo
are
è
all in
complesso, ma
conformity.
è
This is
quello
a
che
complex
garantisce
mechanism, however,
accountability
it
da un lato
guarantees
e dall'altro.
accountability
Per
and
raggiungere questi
efficiency.
obiettivi del
We need to
2030 e
hit
dobbiamo
these
farlo nel modo
objectives by
più coordinato, più
2030 in
trasparente e
the
più cooperativo
transparent
possibile.
manner and cooperative manner. Thank you. I know that you have a video
Sì,
for us.
noi
Yes.
come rappresentanza della Commissione a Milano abbiamo
As
voluto
representatives of the
preparare
Commission
un
here in Milan,
prodotto di
we have
comunicazione
prepared a communication,
che può
a
aiutarci nei
product
nostri sforzi, nelle
to
nostre
help us in our
attività
efforts, in our
di comunicazione,
activities
appunto, per far
for
conoscere
communication
non
in
tanto
order
le grandi
to
politiche europee in
disseminate
campo del
not
Green
so
Deal, che
much the very
cerchiamo di far
important
conoscere
Green
in ogni
Deal
caso,
European
ma far vedere dal
policies,
basso alcuni progetti
but to show you
finanziati
what
con
happens
programmi
from
europei,
top to
programma
bottom,
ricerca
from bottom
Horizon,
to
programma
top.
LIFE, i fondi
And
strutturali,
like the
eccetera.
LIFE
Quindi
program,
progetti
structural
realizzati in
funds,
Italia con i fondi
projects
europei
that
che
have
vanno nella
been
direzione del cambiamento
implemented in
climatico. Ci
Italy
sono
with
dei progetti
European
super
funds
interessanti
for
su come si affronta la
and to improve
desertificazione
the
in
situation of
Sicilia, per
climate
esempio,
change,
o su
desertification in Sicily, for
Torino
instance.
sta studiando un sistema per energia da riprenderla, accumulare e quindi utilizzarla. Ci sono progetti per la lotta alle plastiche in
Project
Adriatico
to
o nei
eliminate
laghi.
plastic
Ci sono
materials
insomma
in
progetti di
the
vario tipo
Adriatic
che fanno vedere
Sea
che il
or in
cambiamento
lakes.
climatico
So
lo
climate
combattiamo non soltanto con le grandi
change
politiche internazionali o
can
nazionali,
be
ma anche
tackled
con
not
progetti che
only
vengono dal
with
basso e che
national,
possono essere
international
incentivati
projects,
dall'Europa.
but
Questo video
also
è stato realizzato da Alice
by
Lizza insieme a
greenfield
Davide
projects. So
Starinieri
this is a
e col
video
progetto
made by
grafico di
Alice
Silvia
Licia
Stella Botte
Starinieri, still
e noi
about
faccio vedere,
graphic project,
se non sbaglio, un
and
piccolo trailer in
this
questo
is a
momento.
trailer.
Il clima del pianeta si sta riscaldando e una sola specie, l'Homo sapiens, ha messo in atto negli ultimi 150 anni cambiamenti epocali, sconvolgendo i delicati equilibri dei sistemi terrestri.
È chiaro che l'uomo sta influenzando il clima del nostro pianeta ed è evidente che sono necessarie tutta una serie di azioni che portano in parte alla mitigazione di questi effetti, quindi alla riduzione in un modo o nell'altro delle emissioni, ma sicuramente una forte importanza che credo che rientri molto nel Green Deal dell'Unione Europea è l'adattamento.
L'Unione Europea, da più di 30 anni all'avanguardia in campo ambientale, è stata tra le prime a cercare soluzioni e dal dicembre 2019, sotto la guida della Presidente della Commissione Europea Ursula von der Leyen, con il Green Deal e con i fondi del Next Generation EU, ha impresso una svolta sulla strada di una crescita sostenibile. La produzione di energia rinnovabile, la tutela degli ecosistemi, l'utilizzo delle risorse naturali, l'adattamento e il benessere dei cittadini sono al centro del Green Deal che l'Europa intende realizzare entro il 2050. Noi siamo andati alla ricerca del futuro, incontrando agricoltori, ricercatori e autorità pubbliche per conoscere storie di successo finanziate grazie agli investimenti dell'UE e capire dove dirigerci oggi per uno sviluppo più sostenibile domani.
Come immagini quello che sarà il futuro di questo settore?
L'idrogeno è un combustibile molto interessante per il futuro perché non contiene la C del carbonio che poi produce la CO2 che non vogliamo. E però tutto questo va affiancato a una produzione elettrica di tipo rinnovabile.
Fino a qualche anno fa si parlava di rischio di desertificazione. Oggi noi siamo all'interno di un processo spinto di desertificazione. Io faccio parte di questa nuova generazione di agricoltori, grazie a una sensibilità maggiore, un maggiore interesse verso l'ambiente, si stanno prendendo cura della terra in un modo diverso.
L'attività di monitoraggio sui diversi laghi italiani ha evidenziato una forte presenza di microplastiche che genera ovviamente degli effetti e degli impatti su tutto l'ecosistema lacustre.
I ghiacciai italiani si stanno ritirando molto velocemente e questa è una situazione che oramai stiamo osservando anche su ghiacciai di grandi dimensioni.
Noi dall'inizio del progetto avevamo in mente che le persone fossero al centro della nostra progettualità.
Io spero di vedere una città e una Milano nei prossimi 10 anni più umana, più accessibile, con meno emissioni ambientali, con meno plastica.
La ricerca di un futuro sostenibile è la sfida che dovrà affrontare l'uomo nei prossimi anni. Una transizione inclusiva che contribuirà a migliorare il benessere delle persone e a trasmettere un pianeta sano alle generazioni del futuro.
Thanks to our guests.
Arrivederci.
Viviana De Marco, Enrico San Pietro and Matteo Ward are invited to join me here for the final panel discussion. So let's keep talking. IDLO is an international organization gathering lawyers and more professionals supporting this global journey to safeguard and protect the planet. We discussed several criticalities. Do you see them daily, in your daily work? Yes? I would have illustrated the same aspects and points that you discussed. I thank Asvis for inviting us. These topics are most important for us. IDLO deals with justice systems, so the notion of equity and fairness is very dear to us, and the same goes for sustainable development, global warming, raising oceans and dryness, if you like, are real enemies of sustainable development. And migration, indeed, is deeply related to climate change. According to some estimates, 200 million people will move in the next 25 years. We expect those people being the most vulnerable groups, local communities, Rome communities, young people, indigenous communities, and children. Why do they move? Because they have limited access to resources countering such phenomena. So, groups impacted by climate change have limited access to justice and governance. Therefore, the challenge is to change these dynamics, working with these groups to turn them into change agents and not victims. Let me mention the impact on indigenous and local communities, accounting for 20% of the overall population. Although they run 80% of resources, they are the guardians of biodiversity. These groups are deprived of their rights in negotiations, in talks, whereas they have a very important role to play. COP15, COP27, getting closer and closer. I would discuss about these groups in those venues today. The 12th of October is the date when Europeans landed to America, and this date marks revolutionary change in terms of access to resources and the impoverishment of some areas. So inclusiveness and the inclusion of vulnerable groups is very important when it comes to women who suffer from deprivation and limited access to decision-making tools. It has been demonstrated that when women have an opportunity to run resources and governance, communities get stronger, healthcare improves, also the management of food, so the food requirements of the most vulnerable groups. So women have a very important role to play and improve those conditions. As for youth, quite often young people are excluded from decision-making circles. But climate change poses risks for young people in terms of their right to life, social and economic development, and health. So they may not be here to see the impact of the climate change, but this is very important for future generations. These are just a few examples to show how the climate crisis impacts upon many different dimensions. the weakest groups suffer disproportionately relative to others. This is very interesting. What about the private sector? How can it help this global effort? For instance, insurance companies. Many believe that those companies get committed only when they see a final target they can achieve. And how? What do you do indeed in the insurance industry? I'm talking to Enrico San Pietro.
Grazie dell'invito.
Good morning and thank you for inviting me to discuss this major topic.
Per noi il tema ambientale ha in realtà più di una sfaccettatura. La prima cosa che credo
can be seen from many different viewpoints. We distribute and sell insurance policies, so we insure risks, and in this framework we see major challenges.
Altrettanto importanti sono almeno altre due attività che svolgiamo che sono un po' meno note.
Additional activities less known that we perform. We are institutional investors, over 50 billion of investment, and the way we invest such resources can have a major impact. Out of 54 billion, 4 is accounted for by real estate.
E anche in questo caso, soprattutto per la parte rilevante che è in gestione diretta, ovvero i nostri alberghi piuttosto che le sedi aziendali.
We run hotels and corporate offices, so we can certainly contribute to achieving the 2030 agenda objectives. It is important for our group in particular, because it is part of our DNA to pay attention to social and environmental aspects. I began working for Unipol 30 years ago. Unipol was already publishing its social budget, reporting on the activities that had a positive impact on social and environmental aspects. Over the years, much has been done and improved. Methodological approaches have changed, as well as taxonomies, and now it is part of our business plan to set measurable objectives
i dirigenti di ottenere o meno
and our executives get bonuses whether or not they achieve those objectives, so it's a serious stuff for us. The three objectives that we have set for this year is to reduce by 2030 46% of CO2 emissions, electricity, gas and other energy sources. This is a commitment that we have started. The latest business plan of the group mentions this objective. During the pandemic, by the way, the emission level, of course, was reduced. So the financial system has a huge responsibility in determining global choices through investment policies, and that's the reason why for starting from this year, this is the reason why we have become part of an alliance of institutional investors who meet under the UN auspices to counter climate change through their investment decisions. So our investments
zero emissioni nette di gas
should
a effetto
have
serra entro il 2050. E anche
zero
questo naturalmente è un
emission
elemento
rate by
importante
2030. This is an important element that we try to pursue by selecting investment that
diciamo minor
in the short run may be less financially rewarding, but they are way more rewarding in the long run. Big companies have a responsibility in this respect. They should all contribute to achieving sustainability goals. Last but not least, insurance proper. Here
siamo alla ricerca di
we are looking for
che permettano al tempo
solutions
stesso,
that
questa naturalmente è una sfida più
allow,
complicata,
and this is quite
di
complicated, to
promuovere
promote
un approccio più responsabile e più
a more
produttivo
responsible,
per il raggiungimento dei
productive
nostri obiettivi comuni di
approach
sostenibilità e al tempo
to
stesso
achieve
rendere
our
questo
common
vantaggioso anche dal punto di
sustainability
vista
objectives,
assicurativo.
making
Proviamo a
it
farvi un paio di
beneficial also
esempi
from an
che credo
insurance
siano
viewpoint.
abbastanza
Let me make a
interessanti.
couple
Uno, se
of
vogliamo,
examples
è
to make this
tutta
clear. The
l'azione
first
in Italia,
example
ovvero la
is
diffusione che soprattutto il nostro gruppo, ma poi molti altri attori hanno fatto dell'offerta di
the
assicurazione
offering
che viene
of
supportata
car
dalla
insurance
soluzioni
supported
climatici
by
che
IT
gestiscono questi
systems.
servizi, ma permettono
IT
anche
systems
per
deliver several
diciamo, la
services
misurazione
and
dell'utilizzo del
also
veicolo e delle
allow to
relative
measure
emissioni
how a
e
car
la
is
possibilità
driven,
di dare un vantaggio
its
significativo
emission
agli
level,
assicurati
which
che fanno un uso,
significantly
diciamo,
helps the
ridotto
insured
e
because
quindi riducono le
they
emissioni, ma riducono al tempo
reduce
stesso anche il
emissions
rischio e permettono
and
di ottenere
risk
naturalmente anche un vantaggio
and
di
obtain, of
convenienza.
course,
Quindi
a
questo è un
financial
esempio molto rilevante perché noi
benefit.
abbiamo oltre
It's a
4
relevant
milioni di
example because we
veicoli
have
assicurati
over
in cui è
4
installato un
million
dispositivo
cars
telematico in cui
insured
effettivamente
with an IT
possono
system on
essere
board.
conciliate le esigenze, diciamo, di
This
business
permits, this allows
di una grande
to
azienda e gli
marry
obiettivi
business needs
di
and environmental
sostenibilità
needs,
che sono
sustainability
contenuti
needs.
nell'agenda 2030. Anche sul fronte naturalmente del cambiamento climatico questo può essere fatto e noi cerchiamo di farlo.
We can do the same
Cerchiamo di
for
fornire
climate
servizi di
change.
vario
We
genere
try
che
to
permettano di
provide
essere più
services of
consapevoli di
different
naturalmente
types,
in alcuni casi azioni di mitigazione. Uno dei più diffusi è
allowing
l'allertamento che
for
arriva attraverso la
mitigation
nostra app,
measures
si chiama
like
Ecological.
alert systems. Well, weather apps be deleted from our smartphones because they're always wrong. No, I would say that the performance level of weather forecast is really reliable, but of course this can't be 100% accurate. Yesterday, a news agency was released about entering into an agreement with SNAM for a civil liability insurance coverage, granting a benefit to the insured, provided that they adopt positive behaviors like reducing emissions and the insurance risk.
Più sull'aspetto sociale che sull'aspetto ambientale, porre maggiore attenzione alla sicurezza sul lavoro, promuovere naturalmente
paying more attention to safety in the workplace, promoting one of the Agenda 2030 SDGs, and mitigate risk to get further benefits. So, in a nutshell, I would say that the insurance industry and our group in particular wants to do its part in pursuing those objectives. Thank you. So let me go for a second round because you really mentioned interesting aspects.
Matteo, guarda, you very often remind us that 20% of water pollution in the world depends on the fashion industry or system. Now, taking into account the textiles production and sustainability is a very important bet. Is it a win? Thank you for the question and for the invitation. It is just winning as it is necessary. Over and above statistics, nobody has clear in mind the actual overall impact of the third most important Italian industry. Numbers keep on changing, they are updated continuously. We certainly are one of the mostly polluting industries in the world. This is kind of a provocative statement. I'm part of this industry. I've been working for an important brand for years, and then I changed profession to give rise to new ideas. We are not an essential industry. We sell essential energies to guarantee the life on the planet in order to produce sweatshirts and blue jeans and set aside the cultural function. We produce over 200 million tons of garments using plastics and as well, and our materials are not fully recyclable. What's the role of the enterprise and the private in so many sectors to be able and set up a sustainable change? I see around my own enterprise a new generation, and this is just a way to turn material into a garment, but we need to revolutionize this industry, very important for the very history of the world and mankind, the industrial revolution with the textile production. What can the clothing industry do in the 21st century? We have overcome our primary function out of discussion. The two main pillars we are focusing on now are first, reconnect human dimension with the environmental one. We forget often that the climate crisis was triggered by a systemic poverty that's quite short date. On a world level, CO2 emissions are due to the production of garments. Every day there is someone in the world that says we need to invest in renewable energies to lower our impact. But since the production has been outsourced in the south of the world, there's no traceability in terms of value chain over and above the main producers. People who make our garments receive 3% of the overall value of the product. What kind of a courage we needed to have in order to impose ecological transition to these people? They haven't got the money to survive. What should we do? First of all, investing and solve the social crisis. The industry produces billions of dollars, and this value is not distributed equally on 65 million workers, mostly women. The textile production has been delocalized for years, at least the Italian one, in the southern regions of the world. It started in the 80s, and our producers receive a salary which is well below the minimum threshold. Where do you produce? In Italy, it is not easy to create a new value chain. The second main aspect, in my view, is you talked about mitigation, adaptation. Let's put a Band-Aid, let's remove this and solve the root cause of this disease. We have no laws and no standards. 70% of what we wear is made up of plastics, so to speak. But in any case, there is an Italian law which bans washing into washing machines or such an aggressive production of plastic-made clothing, which is the primary polluting source of our rivers and sea. No, and then we put people to the work in order to clean riverbeds, etc. So the problem is having a system and a vision instead of working in a funnel, which is typical of our approach to sustainability, not only typical of our industry, but other industries too. Very interesting. The central point, which is the heart of sustainable development. I mean, creating a system isn't just putting together actions or industries. It means to adopt a political vision for us all. We should should have clear in mind that this is a matter of democracy. This scandal, the outrageous situation, is that we do not speak about this so frequently, because then it should be up to the individuals to choose, but at least there should be one universal direction. For this, we need actions. What kind of actions do you require the government to implement in order not to leave the choice to the sectors, but to work as a global system? I would like to refer to something already mentioned. Where are the laws that enable us to change our production systems and manage our resources differently? This is what we suggest at IDLO. We talk about climate justice. The idea is to bring about a regulatory framework, implementation systems, and public policies that might guarantee and tackle the climate change. This is what we suggest in practice. The idea is to invest in the right laws, in institutions that are able to work transparently and introduce also a change in the fight against corruption. We also, and already mentioned, the economic power which permeates all these actions. I'm referring to anti-corruption, transparency, structures that might enable us to stick to international obligations. Article 9 of the Italian Constitution, for instance, you asked how to control are there European regulations that are not fully implemented. For this, we need a justice system in place, putting these themes at the very center and the focus. The system of justice, when centered on the people, is the system that enables us to have the vulnerable groups becoming actors in the decision-making process and in the change. And this is, we see that this change hits strongly the vulnerable groups. At the same time, they do have the potential to change. One last point I'd like to mention is the rule of law. This is a theme that those who have a legal background or those who studied a law know the meaning. It means that such a lens enables us to look at for instance, the theme of conflicts like the Ukraine, but also food safety or energy safety in a different way. We shouldn't forget that there are rules of the game to stick to internationally, nationally. So for us, there is a link, a connection between Sustainable Development Goals 16 and 13 are certainly those that go hand in hand with a climate justice approach. Thank you. Very interesting. Enrico San Pietro, I'm turning to you. Actually, insurance companies in Italy have a very large portion of the Italian public hands in their hands. Yes, 11%. So you have a very strong ability to guide the political actions. Why? I mean, don't you think that an effective request or action by insurance companies not limited to some individual sectors, but asking governments for changes linked to sustainable development? We are speaking of sustainable entrepreneurship. Why shouldn't we link this debt to virtuous political choices resources. Have you ever debated this issue in this sense? Unipol is quite strong.
Allora, diciamo che il
You
tema è
have
effettivamente
an opinion.
particolarmente
Well,
rilevante
this
e
is a
in particolare
particularly
nei periodi
relevant
storici in cui c'è maggiore
issue,
pressione
especially when we
sul
are
nostro debito
subject, like
pubblico,
today,
il
to
ruolo delle
financial
compagnie di assicurazione
pressure.
e degli altri
The
investitori
role of
istituzionali
insurance
è
companies and
stato
other institutional
importante
investors has been
per
important
poter garantire
to
una tenuta
guarantee
complessiva
that everything
della
holds
nostra
up
situazione finanziaria.
in
Quindi
general as the
fondamentalmente
financial
continuare a
situation.
investire qui,
So continue and
ritornando al
invest.
periodo di circa una decina di anni fa in cui
Going
gli
back
spread si
to
erano
10
alzati
years
molto verso
ago
il
when
nostro paese, c'era
spread
grande
values were
diffidenza a
so
livello
high,
internazionale, continuare a investire in titoli di Stato italiani è
mistrust
stato
everywhere. So
particolarmente
the
importante
continuous
per
investments in
mitigare un fenomeno molto.
the Italian bonds. Well, you should put prerequisites to continue with such investments. Well, the insurance company investment choices is a complex matter. You have to consider the volatility, impact on equity, but for sure, as I said before,
della Net Zero Alliance è uno degli
within
obiettivi
the
del sistema
framework
finanziario
of the Net
globale,
Zero
cioè
Alliance is
quello
one
di
of the
riuscire a
global goals,
concentrare
financial goals,
una
to
parte
pool
sempre maggiore dei propri
never
investimenti
growing
in
portion of its own
attività
investments
che
in
perseguano
activities
condividano gli obiettivi
that share
dell'agenda 2030 e in
the
particolare gli obiettivi dell'accordo di
2030
Parigi per
agenda,
emissioni
especially the zero
di gas a
emission
effetto
one
serra entro il 2050.
of
Quindi
greenhouse
questo
greenhouse
credo sia
gases
un
by
tema ancora più
2050.
ancora più globale rispetto a
This
quello che
is
può essere fatto a livello nazionale,
global
cioè il mondo dei mercati finanziari
investment.
globali
This is a
muove
global goal. The
diciamo,
world of
masse
capital
finanziarie
markets
straordinariamente importanti
moves
ed è
extraordinarily important
attraverso il
financial
movimento di le istituzioni
amounts.
finanziarie come noi, che naturalmente
And
siamo in prima
through
fila nel
financial
promuovere questa evoluzione,
institutions like our
che si possono
own,
perseguire scelte di investimento
this
sempre
is the
più
way
finalizzate a
to
favorire naturalmente la
aim
transizione
better
ecologica.
our
Naturalmente c'è anche una rovescia della
investments
medaglia,
to
quindi se
foster the ecological
investiamo
transition
in
ever
un'attività,
more.
facciamo
Of
l'esempio
course, if we
di
invest
abbigliamento
like
che
in the
particolarmente
clothing
sostenibile i nostri
industry,
investimenti però non
sustainable
vengono più indirizzati perché
industry,
naturalmente una quota
but
parte lo è verso titoli di Stato governativi, ci sono
if
pro e
we
contro che naturalmente
in
bisogna saper
fact
equilibrare.
choose
Noi
government
crediamo che
bonds,
sia
we have to
possibile e
rebalance this. This
crediamo
is
appunto che il
possible,
sistema finanziario,
and we
come
are
facciamo a pieno
convinced that
titolo
the
fatto,
financial system we
debbano
are part
abbia un
of
ruolo attivo e
has
fondamentale
an active
nel
and
supportare la
critical
transizione
role
ecologica.
in supporting ecological transition. Then one last word to the youngest expert or panelist. So I think I understood that you make a step backward, but the Alliance for Sustainable Development believes this. How would you ask or envisage to strengthen the alliance and avoid and neglecting the future of the planet? Well, this time is really galvanizing for us. Well, we should give a definition of sustainability. We should redefine the word progress and turn it into social evolution, including profits for the companies, in order to realign our agenda. And for this, we need an alliance based on a system in the light of the finite resources that we have available in our planet. We should review what type of industry is legit, I mean, in terms of using the resources that in reality should satisfy the primary needs of society, and other industries that should be repositioned and transform themselves and grow in terms of quality rather than quantity. This is not a painless effort, but we should work all together. Thank you. Thank you very much for your patience and patient listening, and I wish you all a good work. One minute before we close, I thank all the participants. I thank all panelists. And I hope you were able to follow smoothly. Those who are here, those who are, let's say, connected by the computer. Well, another information. In our website, you'll find the full document of our notebook. In our website, there is a full video that you watched minutes ago. It's a 50-minute video in the afternoon at 3 p.m. at the Historic Archive of the Quirinal. Will be there for another very important conference. Our festival continues in the next few days, up to the 20th of October, final day, to be dedicated to the younger generations. This is, in our opinion, the right way to invest, to insist on this direction. We heard the voice of Europe, difficulties, differences that are objective differences. And whenever we say it is up to Europe, actually, Europe is a conglomerate of different cultures, powers. So the ability to summarize, to reach a consensus is a difficult process. We needed to believe in this process. And over and above fluctuations, ambiguities, differences, our country is fully committed. And it will continue this way, especially in strengthening European cohesion and attributing other powers by reviewing treaties. And at the same time, our country will be able to draw benefits by adopting the European policies, policies that have been there for 3 years, difficult, complex policies, demanding for so many reasons. Implementing the 2030 agenda is very complex, but for this very reason, for this very complexity, because it tackles multiple factors, elements that make up our life and the life of the planet, for this reason, we need to share this all. And this is why Asvis has been created, to foster this process of collaboration, of sharing. That's the only way we can respond to complexity, through a smart collective answer. We all understood that this process is corroborated by other elements, renewables, circular economy, reduction and decrease of emissions, new industrial food processing policies, policies that refer to metropolitan areas. Europe says 100 European cities, among them 9 from Italy, are now committed to reduce their emissions to 0 by 2030. So you understand, it's a huge effort. However, this is a commitment, this is a pledge. So these cities need and have to respond, foster the process, and give to this fundamental objective new and additional credibility. In the last round table, it was said that Europe gives us important contents like a financial taxonomy. It isn't yet a fully fledged process, but it already gives us important information. And this will affect more and more the banking investment system to reorient their resources for the credit or insurance policies, coverage. I mean, they are all referring to the Green Deals, and again, circular economy, the agro-industry, and so on and so forth, cities, transportation, mobility. So this 25% of emissions from transportation, this is a huge element. So financial taxonomy, it'll compel the financial industry to be in conformity with this. I remind you that a new directive is being accepted on the due diligence. The enterprises will have to declare their commitment in the value chains in terms of due diligence. And speaking of the textile and fashion industry, this is a very important commitment. In conclusion, well, today's conference has to be seen in terms of acceleration of commitment. We have to increase our actions at all levels, wishing that the other levels like institutions and the world of policy increase their awareness and their culture for this new vision. We have submitted in September a document with 10 bullet points to invite governments to define the right policies. I am not going to illustrate the 10 bullet points, but they were already discussed this morning, and now it's time to move on. It's time to include them in government programs, increase the national efforts, improve our resilience plan, program. We spoke about how to adapt to climate change. Well, the countries got to update its own plan. So we warmly invite the new parliament to do that. It is necessary as a country in order to have the roadmap, in order for us to go all along in the same direction. I would like to conclude by quoting Pope Franciscus in its encyclical 2015, before the Agenda 2030 approved by 193 countries in the UN, he underlined a very, very important and useful notion to manage and tackle and be consistent with the Agenda 2030. Integral ecology, quote unquote, meaning that everything converges. The destiny of men and women in the planet are the same thing, or is the same thing. Having this propension, this awareness, this responsibility is really a fundamental ingredient to use. And then everyone shall do its part. And those who work in the institutions, in enterprises, the civil society, we're all contribution, but having this in mind, we all should be aware of this and fight all together this important battle for a sustainable future, above all for our next generations.